everyone. Welcome to The Download, where we bring you discussion and analysis from a Catholic perspective. Today is Thursday, June 29th, 2023. It's the Feast of Saints Peter and Paul. I'm Simon Wraith, here with my two co-hosts, Kyle Copey and Nick Wiley. Good to have you with us, guys. And joining us today in the fourth chair is Joe Anders. Joe, I think this is your first time over there in the fourth chair. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Looking forward to the discussion.
Yes, indeed. The discussion today is about the church in Germany, which is not doing well. No surprise there. New numbers show over 500,000 baptized Catholics left the church in 2022. Yesterday, the German Bishops' Conference published its annual statistical report showing nearly 523,000 souls have formally left the Catholic Church in Germany. Germany only had 45 ordinations to the priesthood last year. That is not a typo. That is 45, 40 plus 5, 20 and 20 and another 5. New priests in the entire country. What is going on in the church in Germany, and why are things so bad? That is the question that we hope to tackle in this episode. So, of course, just to start off with, we have such good figures about the number of people in the Catholic Church in Germany, not just because of like the German reputation for efficiency and that sort of stuff, but because there is a tax law in Germany that a portion of your taxes goes to your religious confession of choice. So if you're a Muslim, it goes to the Muslim organizations. If you're Jewish, it goes to the synagogue and so forth. And if you're Catholic, of course, it goes to the Catholic Church. Now, generally speaking, what people do, of course, is they put down on their taxes, I'm whatever, and they put it down, and that money goes, which, of course, has explained why the German Catholic Church was so rich, because people were just sort of default saying, yeah, whatever, I'm Catholic, taxes there and done it. But this means that when people formally leave and they formally, change their religious affiliation, or they, delete it and say, I'm not part of any particular confession, obviously there are very good numbers and a very good way to track that. So obviously that's kind of an interesting thing there within Germany. But that piece of information out of the way, what do we think?
Well, it's something like 8 to 9% of a German's income goes to their particular religion of choice, as you said, whatever they fill out on that sheet. So if you have, over 500...
And that's quite a lot.
It's a lot for someone's income. I mean, mine, think about where your own taxes go and the things you do or do not want those going towards. 8 to 9%, that is a lot. There's the old Protestant thing, and it sort of relates to the Old Testament about tithing 10% of your income. It's not like a on-the-books Catholic teaching. You do have to tithe, but there's no set amount per se. But yeah, it's like, well,
but there is in Germany, it seems.
There is in Germany, it seems. So think about that. With 500,000 Catholics, over 500,000 Catholics that have now formally, they've said, yes, get me off the books on this. They've formally left the church. Think of what kind of financial hit that has done to the church in Germany.
But is it not, because I remember hearing before that to leave, you have to take a fee to leave. I thought that was...
I suppose, though, what there would be with regard to that is whatever the fee is, you'd have to do the cost-benefit analysis, wouldn't you? You'd have to come along and say, okay, it's so many euros to leave, but each month or each year I'm spending this many euros and I don't want to, And I'm certain that, a lot of this 500,000 Germans, I'm certain a lot of these 500,000 Germans are not just saying, adios, buckaroo, or whatever they say, auf Wiedersehen, saying just auf Wiedersehen to the concept of religion in general. On a Sunday, they're probably not just sitting there, in the beer garden, driving their Mercedes down the Autobahn, etc., and having some fun times. The Germans are probably joining other religions. They're probably going to, Germany's always been quite heavily Protestant. They're probably joining Protestant faiths.
Unless you're in East Germany, where no one's any faith. So, if you look at the splits, so the Western, especially Southwest, is predominantly where the Catholics are. And then when you get like in the central and north area right there is where the Protestants are. Then you go Berlin Wall, where the Berlin Wall was east, it's predominantly no faith. If you have, that's where all the atheists normally are. So even after the Berlin Wall collapsed, they still had heavy Soviet influence there, which has kept that area basically pagan.
Yeah.
Well, what you're doing is you have the West right now. You have Western Europe, you have the United States of America. All of them are seeing these massive declines in faith in general, just all across the entire thing. And it's because that what we've seen through a lot of the postmodern philosophy that's been popularized over the past century or so is that there's somehow this currency in rebelling against the mainstream. There's this currency in being different, in being measured by how weird and unique, as they like to say it, you are. And what that does is it makes things that are relatively normal, and one of those things is being a Christian, seem just not countercultural enough for young people to want to get behind.
Yeah, it's just not cool.
Yeah, you're just going to see it done. And the bishops in Germany are doing a horrible job because they're not trying to say the countercultural aspects of Catholicism that currently exist. We could talk about the feminist aspect of things, how we reject many of the mainstream ideas of second wave and third wave feminism. We can look at ideas like we reject contraception. We believe in families beyond nuclear families, big families, extended families. We believe in all of these more complex versions of what we would consider abnormal things today. And they just don't stress it. They'd rather just go and say, oh, you know what, we should bless homosexual weddings because that's what the culture's doing right now. Yeah. It's silly. It doesn't work.
But they're still rich, and because it hasn't hurt them in any way, I think they've banked, I've seen figures, I've seen like $20 billion they have. I think they made last year before that, I think with just the population that was Catholic a few years ago, they banked in $2 to $3 billion in 1 year, just based off that. I mean, about 25% of the country is still Catholic identifying. So it's about 21 million people there are still Catholics. So, I mean, you're getting 21 million people's 8 to 9%.
And that's all, and in Germany that's a lot, because Germany is quite a rich country, and especially if you're looking at the West and the South being the Catholic areas. Obviously, you mentioned East Germany, and you're too young to remember that. I think you know it from history books, but of course, just to give everyone at home the brief historical introduction to it. Following World War II, Germany was divided between the Soviet sphere of influence and the sphere of influence of the Western allies, France and the United Kingdom and the United States. And of course, what happened was very famously, Germany was partitioned into West Germany and East Germany. And East Germany, while not formally part of the Soviet Union, was certainly within that Soviet sphere of influence. And Berlin itself was, of course, very famously divided, because Berlin is within what became East Germany. And Berlin was divided by the very famous Berlin Wall there, with the various sectors of occupation. I'm sure we've all seen the pictures of things like the Brandenburg Gate and Checkpoint Charlie and all this sort of stuff. And then, of course, during this period, the Soviet influence on East Germany was to make it a very atheist kind of place. Then, of course, what happens is the Berlin Wall falls, which is a fascinating historical period that you can look into, which is essentially just caused by grotesque errors on the behalf of Soviet apparatchiks in Berlin. The Berlin Wall falls. David Hasselhoff famously performs on top of the Brandenburg Gate. Marvelous stuff. Not sure if that had anything to do with it.
The Germans love Hasselhoff.
The Germans do love.
They do.
The Germans love a lot of things that aren't necessarily to be loved. But importantly, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, it was very symbolic. It was the reunification of Germany. But we still have that atheism, that anti-Catholicism, that Soviet-style philosophy in the eastern parts of Germany, which is really interesting, because if you look at the other parts of Europe that are the Soviet-occupied within the Soviet sphere of influence, you look at those, they're doing great. Poland was occupied by the Soviets, very famously occupied by the Soviets, rolled in. All of these places. Hungary, this was a country which was massively under the Soviet influence for the latter half of the 20th century. Why? And here is the question, because we're asking what's going on in Germany. Okay, fine. This is what's going on in Germany. Why is it happening in Germany, and why is it not happening in other countries to the same degree?
I think I can answer that. I think it's because it's globalism central. I mean, if you look at why all those other countries are excelling in Central Europe, it's because they writ large have a policy of nationalism, of protecting national identity. And part of that national identity has always been Christianity, Catholics, philosophical, Western civilization, all those philosophical underpinnings. They're geared towards protecting those things. When you look at a place like Germany, they have accepted the EU just wholesale. They've accepted globalism wholesale. And because of that, they're falling prey to everything, all the decadence that you're seeing in the West, all the decadence that you're seeing in the United States at an accelerated rate, because they're right in the center of all of it.
Yeah, I mean, you look at organizations like World Economic Forum, Davos. Who is in charge of those? Well, we kind of know what country they come from. But to answer one of Simon's questions, another observation Simon pointed out, in terms of, are these Catholic defectors, are they going to other religions? Are they going to Protestantism? I don't think that's the case. I think Joe's actually right in that they're just going to atheism. They don't think Catholicism is cool or countercultural. They're just becoming nothing. They're becoming atheists. Because in the same year, the church lost over 500,000, 2022. The Protestants lost over 300,000. And there's been decline, if you look previous to that. So even the Protestants are losing as well.
It's just over 50% for Christian identifying in some form. It's getting closer and closer to 50-50 of Christian, whatever, Catholic, Protestant, whatever, versus no religion at all. Which is in the high 40s.
Yeah, because they don't have many other religious minorities.
No, it's getting
1% Muslim, I think.
Yeah, and not many Jews left.
No.
Which, I know that's kind of like the somewhat cruel joke to throw at the Germans, but while you were talking there, Joe, about this whole sense of like, Poland and Hungary have got this great national identity, and obviously they are. I mean, there's what is it, Orban in Hungary, who's very nationalistic and he's very proud of his Hungarianness and the Hungarianness of his people, and obviously the Poles are very proud of their role and their Polish identity. It's like that experiment where you get a bunch of people and it's like, okay, you've got a bunch of black guys and it's like, are you proud to be black? Yes, no. And it's like, well, yeah, I'm proud to be black. Are you proud to be Hispanic? You ask a bunch of Hispanic guys. Yes, I'm proud to be Hispanic. A bunch of white guys, are you proud to be white? And they're like, And because there's been that pushback on this in the sense, and I wonder, is German nationalism, which is probably necessary to fight against anti-nationalist globalism, is German nationalism just because of the events that happened in the middle of the 20th century in Germany, talking about Nazism, is that just utterly unpalatable for the average German?
Yeah, I think it may or may not be. The interesting thing about Germany is that Germany has been basically a battleground for the communism versus nationalism debate. It's been a battleground, and it was long before Nazi Germany. I mean, you can look at communist agitators like Wilhelm Marr, who actually invented the word anti-Semitism. He invented the word anti-Semitism, used it in his writings, specifically to provoke warfare between the Jewish community and in the Christian community in Germany, which eventually would lead to the strife during World War II about 70 years later.
And he was doing this to kind of allow the communists
Exactly. So this is entirely what we're looking at is kind of like World War II being just that coup de grace moment where they had to choose between nationalism and socialism, and it looks like Germany chose socialism, and I don't know if there's any going back for them. I really don't.
I mean, does it have anything to do, some people are suggesting it has something to do with the synodal way, the collapse of the church in Germany. It's kind of amazing. Germany wants to now create a permanent synodal council, as they're calling this. They had a handful of bishops push back on this and actually blocked the attempt to fund it. This thing's costing millions and millions of dollars. Again, the economic issue to the German taxpayers, obviously, and the German Catholics in particular. The synodal way is costing millions of dollars, going on for multiple years. We don't even have figures of exactly how much it's costing, but it is in the millions, and that's kind of hard to do. Again, they have a lot in the bank to do this, to bankroll this, but they're wanting to create this council, which is sort of like a bishops' conference on steroids. They want to make it have some teeth, actually, have some juridical power as to where, you're a bishop in charge of a diocese. That's, the old school Catholic hierarchical way we've set it up, right? No, they don't want that. They want a central governing committee, Soviet style. And if you're a bishop who doesn't agree with that bishop and the council agrees with that bishop, you have to change your ways. And even Pope Francis is against this.
Well, yeah, I can see Pope Francis would be against this because Pope Francis is actually Catholic. I mean, contrary to an opinion that many people have out there, Pope Francis is not nearly half as bad as people make him out to be. Yeah. But yeah, Pope Francis is Catholic. And of course, he knows, to quote his predecessor, truth is not determined by a majority vote. That was Pope Benedict, I think, when he was Cardinal Ratzinger, said that. It's an important thing for people to understand because I think that a lot of these extra-diocesal, there's a word, extra-diocesal organizations like the USCCB or another committee, a national committee or something like this, or this synodal council or something, we have to understand that these groups have no power in and of themselves except with regard to the membership. So that the USCCB, it can have its vote and it can pass its things and stuff, and obviously it can decide what is it going to do with its money because it's got money in its own committees and this sort of stuff. But it doesn't get to dictate to the individual bishops about how this is going to be. Just the same way the United Nations can go along, they can have a vote in the General Assembly or whatever, and here's a resolution. Well, okay, national governments are not beholden to snap to those decisions. However, a lot of the time, I think you see national governments and bishops using that as cover. It's like, oh, well, personally, I am opposed to this policy, which is kind of a somewhat anti-Catholic policy or whatever. But, the committee said, yeah, the committee has no authority over you. And that's the thing. What they're doing with this, and I think there's a great confusion out there, that people are like, oh, let's blame the USCCB. The USCCB just says something dumb, and a bunch of bishops follow. If the bishops actually showed some spine, they would be fine. But the synodal way would mess that up.
This brings about, I think, a bigger question about what the role of the bishops in a nation are supposed to do, what a national bishops conference is supposed to do, what the synodality is supposed to do. I think in many ways, you can always go back to Nazi Germany for this. You saw there was a lot of sympathetic bishops to the Nazis, and there were other ones that were creating underground churches and doing this. The church's role when the church is, or when a nation is in crisis, is to be that golden mean, to be that ethical standard, to be that guiding moral conscience for the things. Because one of the beautiful things about the Catholic Church during World War II was that it not only opposed the Marxism of the Weimar Republic, but it also opposed the violence to preserve tradition of the Nazi Party at the time. And that was the most important thing, because the Nazis said that all Jews were communists, and obviously we know that that's not true. And we don't take it to we need to kill Jews or this, that. No, we need to convert Jews. We love Jews. That's the whole point. And because we see in the case of the synodal way today, it would be like the Catholic Church during the Weimar Republic not condemning Marxism at all and actually embracing it. And we're actually kind of seeing a second Weimar Republic really coming out of the aftermath of World War II and the aftermath of communism itself. And the bishops aren't being that conscience. They're just kind of destroying.
Which is why I think that one of the things we still don't know to this day, what the heck does synodality mean? We're going to have a synod on synodality, a word that we've never defined, and we just say a listening church. A listening church is a listening church because it listens and because it does this. And we've never defined any of these terms. And so how could it possibly be different? Why is what the Germans doing wrong, but what the world is doing with this synod on synodality, which for all intents and purposes has the same things in their documents? It's just the Germans are trying to implement it. You guys are telling us that we need to listen to people and listen to the Holy Spirit, and when we gather together, that's what the Holy Spirit's doing, and we're just implementing that. And so I don't see why, and that's why a lot of Catholics are saying there's no difference. It's just the Germans are just implementing what the whole world is asking for.
Well, I question that people are actually asking for it. You know, this whole question about,
yeah, sure.
You know, let's go along and we'll be a listening church and we'll listen to the people. Okay, well, who do they go around and ask? There are many examples within these synods on synodality and all this synodal process and all this sort of stuff where they've clearly only asked individuals who are going to give them the answers that they particularly want.
Yeah.
You know, and at this point now, maybe it's entirely possible that the people who are in Germany, you know, who are leaving the church, maybe they're leaving the church because they consider that even the German church is like, this is too conservative, too orthodox, too hidebound for me. Maybe, let's be kind of generous to this 500,000 Germans last year, maybe they're getting out because they're like, dang, I don't want any of this. I don't want part of this stuff. You know, and I'm better off on my own. Again, have they listened to the 500,000 people who've left and said, hey, why did you leave, and see what the answers are? I don't know that they are.
It's either that or some sort of just divine retribution for their errant ways. You know, God is allowing this many people to leave because they're doing things like, just to remind people what's going on with what the German synodal way has agreed upon, what they want to present to Rome with. They're calling for blessings for homosexual partners. They're calling for the laity to preach from the pulpit. They're calling for even, and this is the most bizarre one, they're calling for parishes to go back into the baptismal records and change the people of who want their genders changed because now they've transitioned to a new sex apparently. So I'm going to go back in and change Johnny to Janie 30 years later because he's transitioned. Like, who cares about, first of all, who cares about baptismal certificates? I know church records are great, but who is really, like, no one even knows when they're baptized. If I ask half the people, half the Catholics, like, when were you baptized? They don't even know when they were baptized, like the date of their baptism. And it's like, well, prove to me your record. It's like, well, I have to go to my parish and get it. First of all, no one cares about these certificates, but it's like, who came up with that to go back and change your baptismal certificate?
Well, I think it's this is the push for all this bizarre stuff. You've got the push for the transgenderism, you've got the push for homosexuality, you've got a push for all of these things, which are essentially, they're just deconstructions of Catholicism. They're just deconstructions of traditional, normal, as you said, Joe, life. That's what they are. They're just these deconstructions, because this is essentially, I think, the thrust that we're seeing here. And to be honest, last time we sat here, I sat in that chair and I kind of cringed a bit because we were talking about Germany and my co-host just sort of went on this tear about every single thing that Germany had done wrong throughout the entire history of like civilization in the Catholic Church, starting with, you know, the massacring of the legions in the Teutoburg Forest, all the way through to the synodal way. But the problem is, it's like, well, Marxism came out of Germany. Karl Marx was a German. This was a German idea. Karl Marx's thought was not that communism would take hold in Russia, which was, of course, this vast, primarily agrarian society. He felt that it would take place within the industrialized societies of the West. Workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains, says Karl Marx. He also, says, give me that for free, because that is Karl Marx. But that was there. Martin Luther, the architect of Protestantism, came from Germany. Obviously, there's lots and lots of people who've contributed to Protestantism, but that unique, the match that lit the tinderbox was German. There were a whole bunch of other places who were suffering under much the same sort of corruption and difficulties and so forth in the Catholic Church at that time, but only Germany goes off like that, and you can go on.
Well. This is, we all know we all know the phrase "that's the power of German engineering," right? Everybody knows that, and it seems to me that in the German cultural psyche, there's this obsession over details, and that obsession over details kind of leads the German cultural psyche into this idea that we need to obsess over this detail to the point at which it might actually need to be abstracted for it to be understood on a greater level. So if you look at that from a philosophical tradition, you can start to understand maybe a little bit why we would have a Luther that says, maybe we need to abstract this idea that we have of church authority. Maybe we need to abstract this idea that we have of, ownership of private property, of religion itself as an institution, and then go even further to the German philosophers of the postmodern era, even saying we need to question the validity of truth itself and whether it even exists at all. I mean, that is a consistent philosophical tradition of abstraction coming explicitly out of Germany and later infecting the rest of the West. It's insane.
Yeah, I mean, just getting back to the question again, like why so many Catholics have left here. This should come as actually no surprise to people in Germany, because if you look at, because we talked about over 500,000, that was in the year 2022. If you look in the previous year, 2021, it's almost 400,000 left in the previous year, and I didn't do the research to see what is prior to that, but it's like this is not a new thing. So many people are saying, and I think the sort of the normie response is like, well, they're leaving because of the sex abuse crisis. Well, okay, the sex abuse crisis in Germany is a real thing, so this might be it, but I think this is kind of like a default answer. But for the people that want to go with that, it may be the case, because I mean Germany is, well, just like the rest of the world in the hierarchy, there's cover-up all over the place when it comes to sexual abuse. In 2018, a report came out in Germany that said that this is in the entire country. Nearly 4,000 people, and when I say people, I mean prepubescent minors, people under the age of 13, were abused by Catholic clerics. That came out in 2018. And that's just the people that were reported. They said the number is likely high, and we know from our investigations it's always higher. And that was between the years of 1946 and 2014. One example of that abuse, specifically the cover-up of the abuse, would be the former Archbishop of Freiburg, and that's Archbishop Robert Zolich. So Zolich is one example of these guys covering stuff up. He was in that diocese as bishop for about 10 years. I think he left his tenure in 2014. Prior to that, for 20 years, he was working directly under the Archbishop at the time. So 30 years, this guy had his hands on sexual abuse cases in the diocese. Not one time, hundreds of abuse cases were reported to him. Not one time did Bishop Zolich ever report sex abuse to the Congregation for Doctrine of the Faith. Not one time did he report it to the Vatican. Wow. And and it came out later that he had covered up all these cases of abuse. The man is now 84 years old. He's, in a nursing home. And, I guess a little bit to his credit, he did admit to it. He has offered an apology and says, yes, I was involved with this. He didn't get into specifics. He's like, basically you can blame me for it. It is a step in the right direction, but a man like that needs to be prosecuted. I don't care how old you are. If you're Theodore McCarrick pretending like you have dementia and using a walker, I don't care how old you are, you need to be prosecuted. Your apology is not enough. Yeah, and certainly, that these are, you've got 4,000 people there over that period. Those are 4,000 lives, and how many of those people are known to the people who left? I mean, your question, of course, it's like, well, I'm leaving because of the sex abuse, and people sometimes say that. Certainly, we go, well, that's not a good enough reason to leave. Why would you, leave? Why would you leave Jesus, over the actions of Judas? That's what we always say. The problem is when you've got a situation like this, if they're covering up sex abuse, they're not giving you good catechesis on the nature of the church. You're not getting good ecclesiology so that you understand this is the only mechanism for salvation. I mean, how many... We here in the United States, okay, obviously, a country, to be honest with you, huge numbers of people are of German extraction in the United States. There's a huge German influence within the United States here. And we, from our pulpits, we don't hear good ecclesiology. We don't hear the preaching about the truth of the Eucharist. We don't hear the preaching about the necessity of the church for salvation. Those are the things that keep you in the church. It's like you've got to be here because this is the only option that is salvific. This is the only option for you. And certainly, if you're covering up sex abuse, you're not going around saying, but you need to stay within the church. No, you're being all wishy-washy. There's no daylight between you and the Protestants, and really no daylight between you and kind of almost any religion you care to name. That, I think, is why people are leaving. Yeah, they're given a little push with the sense of there's some abuse, there's some monstrous thing. I'm giving 8 or 9% of my money, to this thing. But fundamentally, it's like, well, why should I? There's no reason to stay. They're not being told.
Yeah, if you saw it as valuable, you would not be going anywhere. I mean, even like the 8 to 9%, I'm sure it hurts. But if you really saw it as a valuable thing that you needed to be at, if you really saw it as the Church of Jesus Christ, then you would go along. You would go along with it, and you would make things work. But that's what happens whenever now they want priestless parishes, and they want women in charge of everything, and all these different things. And so there's nothing there. I mean, the older people said that their biggest thing in citation was the sex abuse. But the younger people, their biggest complaint was the church tax, which they didn't see a reason to pay.
Yeah, because they're not getting anything for it. I mean, this is often a thing that is discussed about tax rates in Europe compared to the United States. Generally speaking, tax rates within continental Europe are much higher than they are within the United States. But people get more services for them. Famously, of course, it's like there's a question of like, well, here's paid maternity leave, or here's healthcare and so forth. And obviously, that's this is not the place to have those discussions. But what you're looking at there is you're saying, okay, well, I'm getting something for it. You ask the average Swede, you ask the average Austrian, you ask the average German. He's okay with his higher tax rates, because it's like, well, dude, I've got. I get something for them. Well, okay, when you break it down, and here's how we break out your taxes, this is, the money for roads, and yes, as the German, I like the Autobahn because I can do 120 kilometers an hour, and it's just hilarious. And, here's the money for healthcare, and here's the money for paternity. Yeah, we're happy with that. Here's the money that goes to the church. Yeah, what do I get for that? The Autobahn, I can go to Oktoberfest at 120 kilometers an hour and then, come back and it's great. This, what do I get for this? I don't get none.
You hit the nail on the head right there. And guess what? They are actually not really getting anything. And like you said, it's because they're not teaching things. Now, from the perspective of just from the perspective of faithful Catholics, people who are already, immersed in the faith, understand the faith, we're properly catechized. You got to start listening to Archbishop Sheen when he says it's going to be up to the laity to solve these problems. If your shepherds are not going to do your job or do their job, I guess we're going to have to do it, and we're going to have to be the ones out there catechizing. We're going to have to be the ones out there evangelizing. We're going to be the ones doing all of this. And that all starts with the rebuilding of the family, the rebuilding of the domestic church. We can pretend that the culture war, is still going on. It's not. It's over. We've lost. It's time for us to just swallow our pride and admit it. Now, the only way to come back from that is to rebuild and regroup, and that starts with the smallest unit of society, which is the family. You're talking about, woman, man, get married, have a ton of children, and what you can do is you can build up that population, you can raise them right, you can make them responsible, you can make them understand the faith, you can get them into vocations, and maybe then one day they can be in some position of power within the church. Yeah. But that takes time, and it could take like 2 centuries, but you know what? That's the slow trudge that we're going to have to get ourselves involved in to get us out of the mess that we're in.
I think it's good that Joe brought this up. So obviously we're talking about the unique problems here that Germany is facing, but as you said, Nick, it's kind of like Germany's just like maybe slightly further along everywhere else, or is just kind of implementing what everyone else is doing in theory. There is a solution to it, and kind of that is the solution, writ large. And so, I wouldn't want to. We've kind of got like 20 minutes left in the show. We're kind of 2/3 of the way through. I would want to say, guys, what can we say, assuming that there are still some Germans watching us after we blame them for everything that we possibly could, and dogged on their roads? But how can they, Germans who are watching this, or how can we, as just people in the West, how can we fix this? Joe gave some general examples, but specifics.
For one, I think sacramental participation, and it's always going back to the family. And what do? You first of all, you get married, you have children, you baptize those children, and raise them in the faith. It's this natural progression that's been going on in how to live your faith life. The church knows how to do this. There is, related to that, there is this interesting little fact that people are touting, and they're like, oh, it's really not that bad that this many people have left, because they're looking at some other numbers. They're looking at sacramental participation numbers, marriages, baptisms, first communions. And interestingly enough, if you look at the numbers for 2022 compared to 2021, baptisms, confirmations, first communions, marriages, all of those have actually went up. Okay, so that raises the question: how are this many people leaving, and these numbers are going up? Okay, here's the answer. First of all, they're going up very, very incrementally, very slightly. It's like 100 more people are baptized or whatever. That's nothing when it comes to the size of a country. And then you have to look at the years. What years are we comparing? 2021 to 2022. Look at COVID. They shut everything down. German was locked down like crazy. You couldn't do anything. You couldn't get married. You couldn't get baptized unless you're doing it from a super soaker or something like that. So you couldn't do it in 2021.
Not sure that's valid.
It may be. We'll do a show on that.
We'll do a show on whether or not super soaker is valid. I'm pretty sure it's not.
But look at the years on that. So if you're comparing 2021 to 2022, there's literally no comparison. It's apples and oranges. Of course, no one was participating in the sacraments in 2021. So if you see any kind of numbers in 2022, it's going to be an increase.
Yeah, it's an increase.
You would really hope so. But I mean, I think that the biggest thing, and this is what hurts, I think, Catholics all around the world, is the fact that the Vatican has released some statements on the German Synodal Way, just not good things to say about it, like kind of some reprimand a little bit in words. Pope Francis has denounced it in certain ways. They had a bunch of bishops and cardinals from around the world who co-signed on a letter about, guys, you need to come back into the fold and all. But we haven't seen one person actually punished, which makes you think that, okay, do you really mean what you're saying? Are you taking this that seriously? Because this is for all the people out there who either for good or bad are doomsdayist, and this is what they're propping up of. Okay, this is what the church is putting forward. This is our future right here is Germany, because look, no one's doing anything about it, and so that's what's going to happen to everybody. And Germany's going to go and they're going to bless every same-sex marriage, and they're going to make all these women priests and all that. We haven't seen it quite yet, but that's what all these people are saying is coming. Why? Because no one has been reprimanded at all for any of this action. And so you kind of have to give credence to them a little bit. You can't really say much to them. Like, yeah, I mean, they've said these statements, but we have to see something. Somebody has to get removed at some point.
Yeah.
This is a greater discussion than just in the church. It seems like all across Western culture, again, there is this culture of no accountability. There's this. You could see it in the government, for example. I mean, good grief! How many times does Hunter Biden have to say his father's right next to him doing an illegal business deal before there's any accountability taken, or any prosecution actually done, any criminal charges brought, anything along those lines at all whatsoever? Nobody in the government ever gets punished. Did Merrick Garland get punished for violating the First Amendment by saying he was going to put informants in Catholic churches, or allowing that memo to come out?
Yeah.
I mean, this sort of stuff is preposterous. Nobody's getting punished for doing anything wrong, and basically what's happening because of it is that our governments, our non-governmental organizations like the World Economic Forum, and the church and the Catholic Church itself is just becoming, like a playground for the demons to whisper sweet nothings into the ears of every single person in power in this world.
And that's why the church is supposed to be that light to the world. The church isn't getting rid of her bad guys. There's no way you can expect the secular world to get rid of its bad guys.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because these people are not being punished. So what happens if and when the German Bishops Conference vote on the Synodal Way and they decide to, for example, bless homosexual marriages, they decide to ordain women, and they go through this process and do it. Okay, well, as you were discussing, they want to actually set up this synodal this permanent synodal committee, this permanent synod there, that is going to be able to say, okay, well, I say that you, Archbishop of wherever, Bishop of Bonn, you don't have any authority except to execute what we as a committee, and you're a member of the committee, you get to vote. You get one vote.
Lay people can be a part of that committee.
Yeah. So there's this. So the decision is made that's not yours. So you are not the bishop anymore. You're a middle manager. That's a model. It's not a Catholic one. What happens when they go along and they say, okay, well, this is it, and we're ordaining women, and they actually go through and they ordain women? Okay, that's a schism. That is a definite, complete, formal schism. They are going to have assumed ownership of the patrimony of the church. Those $2 billion or whatever it is, that 8 or 9% of all the people who are still left in the church that goes into their coffers each year, that's not going to the Vatican, that's going to the German church, and the German church is not going to be Catholic. It's not going to be in communion. There are a handful of churches around the world that are called, something like the such and such, name of a country, National Church or something like this, the National Catholic Church, and they're not Catholic. They schismed off ages ago. Well, okay, we're going to end up with like the German National Catholic Church. It's going to be like, yeah, okay, footnote in Wikipedia, not actually Catholic. What about all of those poor schmucks in Bavaria which is still, quite Catholic, all those poor schmucks in Bavaria who actually want to be Catholic. There's not going to be anything there. Germany would become mission territory. You're going to have to send in missionaries, and it's like, oh yeah, this missionary, operating out from some, tiny little shack or something in the hills of Bavaria or whatever, sitting there wearing, lederhosen among the Edelweiss. He's the representative of the church. The dirty, great big cathedral, Cologne Cathedral. Oh no, that's gone to the schismatics.
But you brought up a very serious question. This is a very serious question. It's one that Catholics, specifically Catholics that have institutional power in the Vatican, hierarchs, the magisterium itself needs to ask this question: is that what we need? Is that actually what we need right now? Does the remnant actually have to begin emerging from the modernist heresy that's been existing, that's been growing in Germany for the longest time? And I'm going to call it that. It is the modernist heresy that the German bishops are falling into right now. It is 100% schismatic from everything I can see that they're doing. They've committed several. Yeah. The blessing of same-sex unions, that's heretical. You can't do that. You're not allowed to do that. That goes directly against Catholic teaching, and it goes directly against the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith. If you don't know, formerly the Inquisition, going directly against the Inquisition, the one who tells you what the church teaches, says you can't do that, and they just go and do it anyways. That's called a schismatic act. Yep. And the question is it time to turn Germany into mission territory? Is it time to turn maybe some other Western countries into mission territory? Especially when you need the evangelization there. You need people to know what the church really teaches, because it's not happening.
And that's what Pope Francis actually told them, is that what they need to be focusing on is evangelization. That's actually what he told them. And that's, they're kind of incapable at this point, it feels like, because they don't know the faith at all. And so, that's where people, because of the modern resources everyone has, you really are in a sense responsible for knowing your own faith. Yeah. You have every single available resource to you. You have Bibles, you have catechisms, you have commentaries to the Bibles. Stop reading things that are being written by heretics. If it doesn't, safety, if you don't know better, if it doesn't have an S.T. before the name, don't read it. If you don't know who the good authors are, who to read, whatever, if it doesn't have saint before the name, just don't pick it up.
We're going to get sued by Scott Hahn. You just watch it.
That's for Scott Hahn's great.
Scott Hahn's okay.
If you know who is good. If you don't know who's good and who isn't, stick to reading what the saint said.
Yeah, I can't disagree. That is a safe position. It's a very conservative, very narrow, but very safe position. Yeah.
An even safer position, the magisterium itself.
Yeah.
That's the way to go. That's the church's authoritative voice. If you want to know what the church teaches on something, you go do that. Now, if you want to get opinions on things the church hasn't decided yet, yeah, go to the saints. Go to somebody with sacred theology next to their name, perhaps. Not everybody, honestly, but there's some good people out there. Scott Hahn being one of them, obviously. I'm a fan, but that's kind of what you have to look at.
Now, the question is, again, why doesn't Rome just come down on the German church? Pope Francis, if you understand anything about ecclesial authority, he could just come down and stop this right now, right? So that's the question, and I don't propose to know his intentions on it. I'm not going to speculate on that specifically. Here's what I think might be going on in Rome, because obviously Pope Francis has advisors, and it's not just him, making this decision. Yes, he is the ultimate authority. What I think is happening from Rome's perspective of what's happening in the German church is I think they know that if the Germans keep going on this way, they will go into schism. I think they know that. We just said it. And they already, materially almost have. So Rome knows that. What they're doing is, because it's a problem with leadership as well, there's not masculine leaders out there, and it infects everything from the politics to the church leadership. A masculine leader stands up, puts his foot down, and says no, and says, you're out of here. Our leaders, even our church leaders, want to be liked. We want the decision to be made for us. So I think what Rome is doing here is they want the decision to be made for them. I think they're just waiting and saying, okay, they're going to go this far. They're going to go this far. We're not going to stop it, but okay, now they're out.
I think there's another somewhat more cynical answer. There's actually two very cynical answers I have. The first one is the money. So the Germans bringing in a lot of money, and some of that goes to the Vatican. Similar to the way that they capitulated to China, because China has loads and loads of cash and was, helping the Vatican out in that sense. It's like, okay, does this come down to the point where the Vatican is actually bankrolling its own budget, with money from Germany. What percentage does that represent? And if you come along and you say, well, we're going, schismatic at that point, we're declaring the entire country, all of you bishops are, unless some of you want to go, hey, dude, not me, I'll be the new mission bishop for the mission territory of Germania or whatever they were going to call it, which is, I mean, come on, that's what the Vatican would call it. The Vatican, I think, is like, I mean, come on, the Vatican hasn't updated its country designation since 350 AD. But it's obviously at that point, it's like you would suddenly lose that 8% of every single Catholic in Germany. That's a lot of money, and you'd lose your slice of that. I think the other one is it's similar to what happened with Father Pfleger in Chicago. Now, Father Pfleger, you're from Chicago, Joe, and Father Pfleger was very famously really utterly dissident in every single way, and he would make political endorsements that were totally inappropriate, and he would give, these homilies that were totally inappropriate, and this whole thing. And it was said to him, hey, cut this out. And Pfleger said, if you throw me out, if you laicize me, if you take away my parish, if you do any kind of punishment to me, I will take them with me. I will take my congregation with me, and they will follow me because they are loyal to me. The question is, if Pope Francis or whomever came out and said, you're done, German bishops, you've gone too far, I'm declaring you in schism. Maybe there's a few that aren't, but you're declared in schism. Would it be like, okay, that's fine, and we'll take our people with us? Then suddenly you haven't actually solved the problem because you've lost the laity as well. You've lost the souls you're responsible for.
You brought up. I want to touch on what you were saying about the finances, the money coming in. A lot of people are saying, oh, we got to keep these people that we already have in. We got to do that. We got to do all these things to make sure that we keep that money coming in from those groups of people. It's like every single Catholic in the Vatican has forgotten about how we got here. Why are we so many? Why are there so many of us? Well, it's pretty simple. It started off with martyrs. It started off with heroic stands of moral excellence. Heroic stands of moral excellence are what got the church so many members, so many people willing to pay in. It was such moral excellence that kings would bow down before it. Kingdoms were converted through fiat, many of them, before becoming true believers later on down the lines with their ancestors. Good grief, how many nations were made Catholic by Charlemagne alone? You got to think about that too. When it comes to finances, if they want to make money, what they're doing right now is extremely counterintuitive. Taking the heroic stand, being the bad guy, and persevering despite being said that you're the bad guy is exactly how you get people to run in and follow you. Because, you were lost and now I am found. That is the entire message of Christianity, is being found, is being born again, doing all of the things that the church teaches, being obedient, looking for that, letting in people of goodwill who are looking for that objective truth. Yeah. And you're wondering why we're in a financial crisis. Well, here's a good reason. You're standing for nothing. That's why.
Simon, you mentioned leaving the laity behind, and we don't want to do that.
No.
We want to pray for the German Catholics, because as you still said, there's about a little under a fourth of the country is still Catholic there, and they're the ones who are going to be caught in the crossfire. And my question is, what is the future of the German Catholic Church going to look like? If you talk to the lay dissidents who are involved in the synodal process, people like Irme Stetter-Karp, this is, I believe it's a woman who's in charge of one of these lay councils that's attached to the synodal way. She says this, and this sort of answers the question, she tries to answer the question here, why are so many people leaving, and what does the church need to do to get better in Germany? Well, she says, Germany doesn't show, quote, enough determination to implement visions for a future of Christian life in the church. First question, don't we already have that vision? Don't we already know how to live the Christian life? We need some kind of new vision that's newfangled and has, all kind of rainbow people running around running it. I'm fine with the old vision. I'm going to stick with that.
Yeah, it doesn't get much more simple than go to all nations and preach to them, baptizing them, and take up your cross daily. That's, if you want to sum it up as the vision, like convert all the nations and take up your own cross.
Yeah, and it is. I think, it's because I mentioned kind of the idea of like the mission territory as like this would sort of be the inevitable practical consequence of a countrywide schism. When you have an entire conference of bishops being declared schismatic or becoming schismatic, okay, well, that then becomes mission territory because you don't have anyone there who is geographically in charge of it. That's the difference between like the diocesan parish model, which is like, okay, this bit of dirt, there's this dude, he's the bishop, he's in charge, he is episcopa, he is the overseer of the area, and it's he's in charge of that. And then it's like mission territory, it's like, yeah, dude, this is a much broader, and it's like go out into there and go. That's where you've got all the missions out in California, because of course they were the buildings that were built to be mission territory. We're going out, we're sent forth, and it was much less formalized. And of course, when you lose the diocesan model, you become necessarily you've got to go back to mission. But Joe's point, I thought, was like, I don't know, this is the going on. It's like, do we need to go back to the mission model?
Yeah, where do we start? Think about how missionaries work. They don't just immediately. I mean, some do. St. Francis of Assisi went up to the Sultan and flat out said, "You're wrong, convert." We love St. Francis of Assisi. Great job. I think that was awesome. I mean, that was wonderful. But the typical way that the Catholic Church would go about evangelizing peoples is they would start with individual families. They would start with building the domestic church throughout that nation and letting that grow and grow and grow until the nation eventually, I would say, fell to Christ in a beautiful way. And was grafted into Christ's kingdom. Yeah. And that's what we need maybe to do in the West. Yeah.
I think we need, to say, to your point, Nick, we need to go out and be preaching the gospel to all people. But ultimately, it is going to come down, Fulton Sheen said, it's going to come down to the laity to do it. I think at this point, this is kind of the message for the Germans. It's like, yeah, your bishops seem to have abandoned you, and those who haven't, they're grotesquely outnumbered. So it comes down to you. If you're a German and you're like, I'm not happy with the way things are happening, well, okay, you need to be getting out there and evangelizing. But also that's true for like all of us in every single country. We need to be getting out and evangelizing people because it seems that the bishops and the priests are just not doing it. So we've got to do it.
And the Germans in particular can't rely on the hierarchy to do it because there's a dearth of hierarchy. There's going to be no more hierarchy if they ordained, 4 people a year for an entire country. That's all they got.
45.
Well, 45. Yeah, 45. Sorry, it was a low number.
It was not. It's not many.
I'm thinking the Archdiocese of Detroit.
Archdiocese of Detroit ordained 4. But I mean, I think the question is, and I don't have the figure. Yeah. How many priests retired or died in that period? I mean, specifically, how many priests died? Because priests never retire. I mean, obviously they come along and they still continue. But how many priests died? Probably more than 45.
Yeah, I think so. And talking about the missionaries, obviously it's going to be the faithful German people themselves sort of re-evangelizing the culture. But outside missionaries too, Poland's pretty close, right? So let's get the Polish guys over to re-evangelize Germany.
You're advocating for Poland to invade Germany.
Religiously.
Hey, bold. Religious invasion. Hey, they're 92% Catholic. I mean, let's try it.
I specifically said that Poland is doing well, and I think arguably Poland is doing well. When we came in, we were talking about like Poland's great, nationalist heritage there of the unique Polish heritage. But Poland really did suffer under the communists and really did suffer in a horrible way, and there was a backlash to it. I don't know that Germany, as a new fused thing, they've always been very rich and well.
Who was it? Was it Francis de Sales? Who was it that basically said that, if you give me 10 holy men, I'll go and I'll convert the whole world? Because it doesn't take that many people. All it takes is a small number to an intermediate number of like really solid, holy people going out there, making demonstrations, talking to people that end up sparking everything. Yeah. And so it's not like you need to have these masses and masses of German Catholics that are doing all the work. If you have some really holy people, stuff will start to happen.
You know what? You say 10 men, I say only one man, and his name is David Hasselhoff, because I just found out he was born Catholic, so he can go back to the country.
I knew Hasselhoff was born Catholic.
There's our missionary. David Hasselhoff.
So that our suggestion for Germany is because they so love the Hoff that they will convert. So we need to get him to convert back to Catholicism, and then he will be the example there to do that. Yeah, obviously. I preferred your idea of getting Poland to invade Germany. I thought that was better. Anyway, thank you for joining us for today's episode of The Download. Now, please join us as we finish in prayer, begging Our Lady's intercession for our nation and for our church. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Salve Regina, Mater Misericordiae, vita dulcedo et spes nostra salve. A te clamamus exules filii Eve, a te suspiramus gementes et flentes, in hac lacrimarum vale. Ea ergo advocata nostra, illos tuos misericordes oculos ad nos converte, et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis post hoc exilium ostende, o clemens, o pia, o dulcis Virgo Maria. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you again for joining us for The Download. We premiere a new episode like this, not always about David Hasselhoff. Sometimes we talk about other things. New episode every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. From all of us here at Church Militant, may God bless you.